Hey everyone, welcome. This is Marilyn Shannon, the Breaking Free Show, and we've had a time, but we're here. Next time you join us and you see we don't come in exactly at 1 o'clock, don't fear, we're gonna be here. So just hang on, just like you did today, and just know that we're coming. Sometimes when you go live, things happen and you can't help it, but we're always gonna be doing our very best to come in on time, as always. So we have a very exciting show today in store. We have two guests, and we're going to be talking about something that is fun and informational, interesting, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to have questions about what we're talking about. So, anytime during the show, you are more than welcome to give us a call at 919-518-9773 to call into our studio. Can they also call in on voice too? Computers 2K Voice on Skype. That's computers, plural, the number 2K Voice. And join us in on Skype if you have any questions or you want to know what we're talking about. So before we go on, hi, Amnon. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. I think after this, you can use a little cider or beer.
Yeah.
That's a giveaway to what we're going to be talking about today. So I want to welcome my two guests on with me. We have L.A. McCrae. She's the owner of Black Star Light Line Brewery. Welcome to the show. LA, can you hear me?
Right.
Okay, maybe she'll.
No, he sure was down.
Okay, LA, can you hear me? Hello? It's okay. Well, let's see. Hopefully she's going to come on. And then we have John Clowney. John, are you here?
I am here. Thanks so much for having us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Okay, she's frozen, but John is here. And John is with Bull City Cider Works in Durham, North Carolina. And LA is, hopefully she'll be back. John, woo! Yes. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So tell us a little bit about you as we get into the show.
Yeah. I did not grow up, brewing in a brewing family or go to school for it. My wife got me a homebrew kit in 2012, and I made some terrible beer in the backyard, but I still shared it with my friends and family. And then, kind of collaborated with one of my friends growing up, Ryan Bogard, who's one of my partners at Bull City Cider Works. And he had moved back into North Carolina to start a PhD at Chapel Hill. And so we kind of caught back up, reconnected, started making some cider in the backyard, and then from there turned it into a business pretty quickly. So there are four partners at Bull City. I'm one of them. Ryan, as I mentioned, is one of my other partners. He's primarily in charge of all the brewing operations, making the cider. Given his background as a microbiologist and biologist, so he did biology at Chapel Hill, and then he had worked in Harvard Med School for about 7 years, and then had come back down to Chapel Hill for his PhD. And so did a year of that, and then left on good standing. And then we started the cidery, and so he started doing that full time. And then two of my other partners are both from Durham originally. Ben Ingold, you may know Ingold Tire in Durham, right there at Chapel Hill and Buchanan Boulevard. It's been there for about 75 years, I believe. So that's his family. He grew up in Durham. He went to Wake Forest with me. And then our fourth partner, AJ, grew up playing baseball with Ben in Durham, and he went to Carolina as well. So of our three partners, everybody went to Carolina at some point. Ben went to Wake Forest undergrad with me, and then went to law school at Chapel Hill. And immediately out of school, my degree is actually in analytical finance and accountancy. And I had my CPA, but never practiced. So I actually moved to New York and worked on Wall Street for a couple years, and then moved to Philadelphia and worked for a private equity real estate firm buying warehouses. And then moved to Raleigh in 2011 when my wife was doing a residency. And at that time, like I said, a year and a half later, we were making cider in the backyard. And now we have two locations. We have the 5,000 square feet downtown Durham. About 20% of that's dedicated toward production, where we do small batch ciders. In fact, we just did the release of the Slow Ride, which is a rye whiskey aged cider this past weekend. And we've got two really cool ciders coming out later this month in Durham that are single varietals. So one is just a Crimson Crisp apple, single variety of apple from North Carolina Orchard, Perry Lowe Orchards up in Moravian Falls. And then also the Pink Lady apple, single varietal, just Pink Ladies. And then we also have a third, which is a blend of the two.
So let me ask you something before you go on with that. So do you and I want to get into some more detail, because I think it's so interesting, first of all, how people start businesses and just the kinds of businesses and all of that, but do you also ship out cider, or is it
We
just
do.
local?
So, yeah, and that's one thing. So we've got the two locations, the one in Durham, and then we have our Lexington, North Carolina location, which is right off of 85, which works out really well for us because we do ship our cider outside of North Carolina. So right now we distribute statewide, throughout North Carolina. So we have 6 distributor partners in North Carolina. We have 5 distributor partners in South Carolina, and then we have one distributor that handles the entire state of Georgia.
Mhm.
Our next markets that we'll look at, beyond that will probably be the Tennessee and Virginia markets, making the most sense since they're, adjacent to North Carolina. But, we knew, I guess, backing up a little bit, when I started doing research, in 2013, really taking a look at the market, at that time, you probably had about 3,000 breweries in the country, either active or in process of permitting. And then if you fast forward that to now, there's about 7,000 breweries, probably approaching 8,000 breweries in the U.S.
Are you talking
So from that
beer? Are
perspective,
you talking beer or cider or a
I'm
combination?
talking beer. So yeah,
Beer.
strictly making beer, not wineries or anything else, but malt beverage based. So really brewing and making ales and IPAs and things like that. And so when I started looking at the market, I really noticed this gap and saying, okay, with the cider market, you don't have nearly the competition. At that time, really the only thing that was making the huge push on the market was Angry Orchard, which is owned by Sam Adams, Boston Beer Company. They really kind of launched their campaign and became a big company devoting resources to it in 2012. So cider had basically been pretty much dead to the market. Woodchuck started in 1991, I want to say. So that had been around. It got bought in 2012 by CNC, which owns Blackthorn and Bulmers and Magners over in Ireland. But basically, nobody had hopped into the cider market. So at that time, I mean, there were probably only a couple hundred cideries in the entire country. If you fast forward that now, there's been substantial growth in the market. So at the time that we actually permitted Bull City Cider Works and started building everything out in 2014, the only other real true cidery in North Carolina that wasn't a vineyard that happened to make an apple cider was pretty much Noble Cider Works up in Asheville. And then Black Mountain was coming on around the same time as us. Red Clay just started up
Mhm.
a little after us. So it was a very small market. So even at that time, if you combine and said, okay, the cideries, including Bull City, which was just starting in the market that existed at that time, plus Noble and these other guys, and the vineyards that happen to make a cider, there's only about 5 ciders being made in North Carolina.
Mhm.
If you fast forward that to today, there's about 21 places making cider in North Carolina now. So the
Yeah.
market in North Carolina has grown a lot. A lot of people don't realize that North Carolina is actually the 7th largest grower of apples in the country, behind Virginia, which is number 6. But Virginia had a much more developed cider culture, and North Carolina is catching up with it. And if you look on the whole landscape as the national landscape, there's about 820 cideries
So what is
now
a
active.
cider culture? Tell me what that's interesting. What is a cider culture?
Yeah, well, and a lot of it, I think cider can fall into 2 different categories. It's a unique beverage, and because you've had cider, it really is a hybrid. You have beer drinkers that will also drink cider. You have wine drinkers that will also drink cider, and you have pure cider drinkers. And you've got people that just drink beer and they don't overlap. And it is nice that the beverage actually pulls from both wine drinkers and beer drinkers. And when you really look at how we've positioned ourselves, I mean, we have people that come out, they have a great time at the cidery. We also still sell beer at the cidery for people who just can't find a cider that they like and refuse to try it. But we pull from a larger demographic and we kind of fit into both categories. So we do a lot of brewery events, your Beericanas, your World Beer Fest, your Brugaloos, events like that are primarily or historically focused toward beer. But then we also, have found a niche and a fitting where we slide in with some of the wine events as well. And I think that is very unique about the beverage, where it doesn't necessarily only appeal to one group, because I think you do have people that, oh, they really love wine, but they detest beer. They won't drink it, or vice versa.
Mhm.
And I think that cider drinker kind of hybridizes both markets. And so it's pretty neat.
S
Um,
So what is the is it the flavors? Is it what is the overall fascination with cider?
I think it's a couple different things. I think there are the flavors, like the adjuncts that you're adding in, just the way breweries are doing with different types of beer with unique flavor profiles and ingredients that they're adding. We certainly do that with cider when you look at things like our cherry tart with the Montmorency
Mhm.
cherries or our ginger cider or things like that. So I think there's part of that is certainly that fascination. But if you get away from the adjuncts and you just focused on the pure cider itself, there's about 6 to 7,000 varieties of apples. So there's so many different combinations of just fermenting single varietals of apples
Mhm.
or combinations that haven't even been touched. And I think that's, it really is a wide open market in terms of exploration and really digging much further
Mhm.
into it than we have at this point.
Mhm.
And historically, I mean, if you look at the nation overall, I mean, in colonial times, cider really was our primary beverage. Colonial New England and Massachusetts, they were consuming 31 gallons for every man, woman, and child. And I
Wow.
think a couple different factors impacted the death of cider really for the better part of a century. And that was you had industrial revolution, so you had people moving away from farms into cities. Then you had all this German and Irish immigration into America. Obviously, those are beer cultures. They were going to figure out how to have their beer. So grain propagation kind of caught up and beer manufacturing caught up. And then you had prohibition where a lot of orchards were cut down. So you took this beverage that was historically such an American style and flavor profile. Most of Johnny Appleseed or John Chapman's, plantings were really geared
Mhm.
toward apple varieties that you would use for cider, not for eating. But you had this significant cider culture and kind of backbone of the U.S. of we're cider people, and then it just kind of died by and large from those factors that I said, and really never resurrected until obviously there was cider being made, and you have the stories of family orchards and people remembering pressing apples with their grandparents, and they'd ferment some of it,
Mhm.
which are great stories. But in terms of commercial scale and production and as an organized industry, it didn't exist by and large for the last 70 plus years. And then
Mhm.
like I said, Angry Orchard has kind of come on the market. They've spent a lot of money advertising and creating a little more awareness of the category. Behind that, you then had a lot of the other beer companies, the Anheuser-Busch, the Miller Coors, with varieties like Smith and Forge and Johnny Appleseed and things like that coming online. But the growth that you're really seeing in the market and where the market's happening, or where it's growing the fastest today for sure, are the local and regional cideries, which is a lot of the parallel that you see in the beer market also. But your primary growth is really coming from the Bull Cities, the Two Towns, the Down East, the Noble, the Bold Rocks, these regional and local cideries as opposed to the beer-owned company ciders. And I think that's because you've seen the flavor profile and preference of folks shifting away from super sugary sweet beverages, a lot of what Angry Orchard initially offered in the market, and really wanting to taste the apple, and understanding the nuances and the profiles of the true cider. Um, so it's on the one hand, it's great to have money invested in and creating a category like cider from a large conglomerate like Angry Orchard, because it creates at least the cider as a word or an idea in our vernacular. However, we have to do tons of consumer education because you've certainly, with the sweeter ciders, turned off a certain segment of the population that just assumes they don't like cider. So we do tastings at grocery stores and beer events and wine events and all over the place. And anytime you do these, you're going to have people that come up and their first response to you is, "Oh, it's cider. I don't drink cider." And so then you
Well,
ask them
that
that,
can I
well,
interrupt you? That's interesting because 'cause I'm
yeah,
gluten-free. And
yeah,
so, I drink wine, and lately, though, I get really sniffly from wine and from if, too many sulfites, and I can't drink too
hmm
much liquor. So I never didn't like cider when I first started when I had it. I thought it was too thick, too syrupy. But it's
yep.
interesting what happens when you drink good cider.
And I think that's precisely it, I mean, when you look at a lot of the macro produced ciders, the things that you're finding mostly at the grocery store, if you're looking at a traditional, I don't even know what their primary brand was called, but with the Angry Orchard, if it's the crisp or whatever, if you're looking at something like Angry Orchard or Woodchuck or something like that, typically their sugar content is going to be somewhere between 16 and 32 grams of sugar. The calories are going to be somewhere between 180 and 220 calories. And then the alcohol content is only going to be about 4 or 4.5%.
Mhm.
And so the reason that is they're starting the process similar to pretty much every other cider that's made. You're going to bring in your raw apple juice, or some of these companies use concentrate. We do not, but you'll bring in your raw starting apple, either juice or cider or concentrate. Pitch the yeast, start the fermentation. But a lot of these companies will ferment totally dry, so they're basically making an apple wine, And then on top of that, they'll blend back either apple juice or concentrate or sugar and water to put sweetness back in the liquid. So when they do that, it cuts that alcohol content. If you've taken something that you fermented, and let all the sugar be turned into alcohol, that's what fermenting dry means. So you pitch the yeast to converted all the sugar into alcohol. With most apple cider, raw cider, that would probably put you around 7% ABV. And then after that, they're adding back apple juice, which is extremely high in sugar
Right.
and calories, and it also cuts that alcohol content down to about 4.5%. So that is most of your grocery store ciders, ones that you'll find on the shelf and the cold sets there. If you look at the back of it, they're going to look like that. And some of them will even list and note that they've got concentrates that they're using. From our perspective, when we started and we were making cider in the backyard, we bought every cider we could access in the market and tried to figure out what profiles did we like, did we not like, and overwhelmingly, what was available on the market, and still most of what's available on the market is very sweet, very sugary, exactly what you're talking about. And I think it turns people off
Mhm.
from the category if they've only had one experience to cider and they've had something that's super sugary and sweet, then I think their perception is that is the definition of the entire market, and it's not. Now, it's part of the market for sure, and a vast part of the market, considering Angry Orchard really controls about 60% of the cider sales in the country. But if you dig in and you try the Bull Cities and the Nobles and these other ciders that are around, you'll notice that they're not adding back a ton of apple juice. Some of them still might put a low level to it, but your sugar content's going to be lower, your calorie content's going to be lower, and your alcohol content's actually going to be higher because you're not diluting the beverage. So it's, like you said, you had ciders before and you're like, oh, it's super syrupy, it's super sweet, don't really like it. That's why we face a lot of consumer education as our primary hurdle. We have to do so many events and tastings. We did over 300 events last year.
Mhm.
And it's getting out and letting folks actually smell the product, taste the product, and
So
understand
how
what
much
exactly
sugar
cider is.
so how much sugar and how much alcohol are
Yep,
in your ciders?
absolutely. So if you're looking at the comp, apples to apples, I guess that's a great way to put
Yeah.
it. For the traditional, say, a flagship that Angry Orchard is going to have, or Bold Rock, or somebody like that, our flagship would be the Off Main. We are very creative in our naming conventions. We started right off Main Street, so Off Main was the name of the cider. And our calorie content on that's going to be 160 calories. Our sugar content is 8, so anywhere from half to a third of the amount of calories that or grams of sugar that you're going to get in the other ciders. And
Okay.
then our alcohol content is actually 6%, and that's because we actually start the fermentation. We don't ferment totally dry and then add back apple juice or concentrates. We actually watch our sugar content and the fermentation, stop the fermentation early, and then filter out the yeast. And then if we are making something special, say the sweet Carolina with honey in it, or the cherry tart, or the ginger cider, at that time we'll bring in those adjuncts to the cider to create those specific profiles.
Uh-huh.
But our base flagship cider, the Off Main, yeah, you're going to be 6% ABV. You're going to be 8 grams of sugar and 160 calories. So very different from what else is primarily available in the
And,
market.
and then your and then your recipes, like how you come
Mhm.
up with these, like the tart or the this or the that, the pear, whatever it is that you're doing, the combinations. How do you
And
how
it's
do you figure that
interesting.
out?
So Ryan and we'll just kind of think about it and kind of talk it over, or he'll come up with ideas of unique ones to try. And there are certain flavor profiles that are going to work, right? I mean, if you're making a pineapple cider or cherry or something like that, it's pretty down the fairway, right? These are commonly known flavors. They're easy for people to understand. I think where it gets more, kind of wild or pushing the limits are things that we're doing, like our cider release next week is Ants on a Log. So we found a peanut butter powder that we could actually blend in. So it's a celery
Wow.
peanut butter apple cider. So that'll be released next weekend. But things like that, we'll still try in a micro batch to experiment and say, okay, this worked or didn't work. And we do these contests. We've done them the last couple of years with Unknown Brewing down in Charlotte, and they do a strange brew. And so you try to make, hey, what is the craziest kind of push the limit cider that you can make? And I guess we've done 3 years of it now. The competition's been going on. We won the first year, and then we've placed second or third in the other 2 years. But
Mhm.
certain flavor profiles and herb profiles, whether it's like our watermelon, the Daily Rind, it's a watermelon basil mint. Those are flavor profiles that if you kind of know that they're going to work just conceptually, and then you've just got to dial in the amounts to make it the perfect
Right.
beverage. And
Hmm.
some of the stuff like the beet cider, the beatnik is kind of pushing it a little farther, and kind of thinking outside the box a little bit. But I think it's something that people
Hmm.
loved and they didn't necessarily think they would. But you have nice sugar content on
Hmm.
beets, and so you got to think about things like that when you're trying to make the
So
determination
how
of
how
trying something new.
healthy is cider?
Well, I mean, on the one side, like you said, a huge portion, or at least a significant portion of our market would be people who are gluten free. So if they're celiac or paleo, or trying to cut back or cut out gluten in their diets, that's certainly important. So from that aspect, if you certainly are gluten free or trying to be gluten minimal, cider or wine are obviously preferred beverages because they don't really make a lot of gluten free beers, and not a lot of gluten free beers are very tasty.
Right.
So I think that's important. And the calorie content, it's not gonna. It's obviously not as light in terms of calories as something like a Michelob Ultra or something like that that has a ton of water content to it and very low ABV. But it's also just a very natural beverage. I mean, we're not adding in a bunch of preservatives or anything like that. I mean, there's natural sulfites that occur from apples, just like from grapes. And because we do have shelf stable product, we have to, actually add in a minimum amount of sulfites to be compliant with, keeping things preserved on the shelf and making sure nothing happens to the product, keep it fresh. But we dose on the very lowest amount. So, I mean, if you look in our ingredient list, I mean, the off main, for example, it has three things listed. It's apples, yeast, and sulfite for preservation, and that's it. There's nothing else we're adding. We're not putting concentrates or other sugars in. And I think that is important, though. I mean,
Hmm.
all the ciders, unlike beers, do list nutrition facts on the back of the bottle or can. And I think folks should pay attention to that. I mean, one thing that if they don't identify that they're using concentrate, some will put an ingredient listed as hard cider as an ingredient,
Hmm.
and that is a loophole way of using concentrates to make the hard cider and saying hard cider is your input.
See.
But from our perspective, we try to be very transparent. We use, fresh fruits or concentrated frozen fruits that are from farms that
Mm.
we know whenever we can, and
Wow.
that's how we make our
It's
products. So
fascinating. I mean, it really is fascinating when you take a little snapshot
yeah,
into the behind the door scene of something that is like this. And the other thing I've noticed in coming to your in coming to Ciderworks, and also, but what I've noticed in general from going to um, places that are maybe beer, cider in general, is there's so much community stuff
there
going
is.
on. It
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 is.
seems
And
different than it seems like some big extension to what you would have normally expected it to be.
I think that's important, beyond just the cideries, when you're looking at the breweries and the vineyards. They really are, and this is probably why you have the explosion of these type of institutions and businesses across America, and why you're able to support, 7,000, 8,000 breweries and 800 cideries and who knows how many wineries we have at this point. Because they are exactly what you're saying. They are meeting places for communities, and they're engaging community, not just, hey, you're coming by the bar, but you're coming by to an established business that was created by entrepreneurs that had an idea, that went out, that they did it, and they're inviting you in, and you're engaging with the community in ways of run clubs and yoga and trivia nights and things like that. And I think people really appreciate that, and it's fun to. I think people like knowing who owns and operates their business and having that arm's length of, hey, I know the guy across the bar. He started in his backyard. I think people really enjoy that.
So that's interesting. So that's a piece I'd like to speak about. It's we love talking about all kinds of businesses and things. Part of the purpose of our show is to share, a tool, a strategy, a technique, a new business, an idea, how somebody did something so that we can be inspired, people can feel, maybe I can do that too. It's a freeing thing, right? So here
Absolutely.
I've so tell me about that element, about, how important is that today in businesses, and is it the just the type of business? Because I mean, you got a really good handle on things. Is it the type of business, or is it, um, just business in general, the direction of business? What do you think?
I mean, I think it's a lot of that. I truly believe is that engagement with the community, and I think that had you asked me 10 years ago, would was my dream to own a cidery? I mean, 10 years ago, I'd have been 25. No, my dream was not to own a cidery or brewery or something like that. But I think the dream was to create something that's respected, and I think that's what we try to do at Bull City, where we're a very inclusive work environment and we try to be so engaged, not just for bringing people in for the things that are like I was talking about, the trivia night and the yogas on Sunday and things like that, but we also are very engaged in the other things like Pause for Pints that we'll be doing in Durham here in a few weeks with the ASPCA, the Humane Society, with Seeds in Durham. I sit on the board for the United Way in Davidson County, where we have our Lexington location. So we try to get involved with as much true community involvement that's not just about our business. And I think that is the hallmark of the successful business, correct?
Mhm.
So it's that you're not just visible in your community, but you're actually actively supporting those other initiatives of your community.
Gotcha.
To truly be a successful business, I think that's what we've got to be doing. And I think we certainly spent a lot of hours trying to do that at Bull City Cider Works. So hopefully it's working out and people recognize that. And, I think beyond that, those are things that I hope people look to our business and feel good about who and what we represent. And then beyond that, from the true just transactional side of our business and having the people come in for the fun stuff and the big parties and things like that, it's just we want to be an open and fun environment for people to come in and feel like they're getting their money's worth and that we're selling them the correct experience. I mean, that's what we tell our team. The most important thing we are selling is experience, not cider, and make sure that everybody has the best time they possibly can and everybody feels welcome, because it is humbling, at least to me, from the standpoint of the people are consciously making an allocation decision with their money that they earned with whatever their job is or whatever they do for money. They have earned that money and they have consciously made an allocation decision to say, hey, you know what? We're spending a portion of it here. So it's our responsibility to make sure that when they show up, they're having the absolute best experience, and not just that they came once, but they want to come back again to see us.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that it's the direction of businesses today. It's on more grassrooty.
Mhm.
Angie is on our chat and she says it's like hanging out at your friend's house. We
And that's
go
the way we
to
want it. We
yeah,
want people to have that sense of community and comfort when they come in, not something that's pretentious or, esoteric for folks. It's come in and and that's fine. Come in with no idea whatsoever about cider or anything about it. Show up and people are going to be willing to talk to you about it if you're not there for an actual tour, but walk you through our
really.
ciders, walk you through anything about Bull City, and hopefully you have that exact feeling that you feel comfortable that you're just hanging out at a friend's house, and that's really what we try to do.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a feeling. I mean, people hanging out playing games. I mean, it's a cool place to come from.
And we're super pet friendly. People
Yeah.
always bring their animals by, obviously. So
That's good.
uh,
That's great. And
we
we
love
know,
doing stuff
we're
that way.
trying we have another guest and I'm not sure if is that her trying to call in now? Oh, so what should she do if she's hearing this? Okay, call on Skype. The 919-518 which computers 2K voice. Okay, if LA, if you're listening to me, if you could call in on Skype at computers 2K voice.
No.
Oh no, what are you telling her?
The one that she's been calling without video.
Okay, the one you've been calling without video. That would be great. And Chris, if you're listening to this, can you please tell her to do that, because we have another guest who's been trying to come on and hasn't been successful. Here's a question for you, and this is a really interesting one. And Chris asked this out in the chat. She says, "How will the new aluminum and steel tariff affect the craft breweries and the brewing industry?"
Yeah, and I think when you look at the steel side of it, that's important less to the consumer and more to the actual business owners and those entities and investors, because a lot of the equipment that we use, whether it's us or Full Steam or choose whatever brewery or Black Star Lime Brewing, any of the breweries or cideries or wineries, we use a lot of stainless steel equipment. The tanks are stainless steel. The canning components or bottling lines have tons of stainless steel on them. It is everywhere. So from that perspective, you are talking about what could result in a higher cost for capital items, right? True large equipment purchases. when you think about it, and we don't can, we actually bottle, but we will look to offer some level of cans in the future. A lot of that, though, say there's a 10% increase on the cans. What that's really going to translate into is probably a 10% higher price on your
Mhm.
purchase of a six pack at the grocery store that's in cans. The breweries and the cideries of the world are not going to eat that cost. It'll get passed on to the consumer 100%, I
Mhm.
believe. But certainly, like the overall like capital items, whether it's new fermentation vessels or brew houses or canning or bottling equipment or keg cleaners or kegs generally, with all that stainless steel, those will be increases in capital goods for sure for all the breweries and cideries as they expand or upgrade or redo their
Mhm.
equipment. So that is
Mhm.
a concern. I mean, it's going to be more expensive to be in the business or more expensive to expand, and that could have an impact on the overall growth of the industry,
Mhm.
both cider and beer and wine potentially. Um, but at the same time, I mean, you think about the fastest growing segment of the wine industry is actually canned wine. It's growing at a fantastic rate relative.
Canned
And granted, all
wine?
yeah, exactly. So
Canned.
they are now canning wine. Barefoot's got
Yeah.
some. Probably the most prominent that I've seen is Underwood, which is
Wow.
out of Oregon.
Crazy. That's
And they do,
crazy.
the Chardonnay.
Well, hold on a second. I think LA
Yeah.
is here now. LA, are you here?
I am. Can you hear
Wow,
me?
we can hear you, and you got some fortitude.
That's right.
Cool. Well, I'm so glad you finally were able to get on.
Welcome
Yeah,
back.
thanks so much for having me. Thanks.
Welcome back. We had such a good conversation before we actually went on the air. Now we lost you, and now you're back. So, um, John, I'm gonna just go
Yeah,
to LA
absolutely.
for a bit. So, LA, tell everybody about you.
Yeah, Black Star Line Brewing Company started as a dream that I had when I was 15 while living in Bel Air, Maryland, and really looking at cultivating a community space for those who are marginalized and historically and demographically disenfranchised. So we began to brew, just completely inspired by ancestors, spirit guides, friends on the journey, hosted brew days where folks could come learn with us, and since then have really been a community centered and focused brewery.
So, go back a second. You were using Ancestry. What? Say that again.
Yeah, so we came to learn that I come from a line of home brewers in East Tennessee and North Carolina, and we're just literally praying. We had no clue what the first thing to do was with brewing. So we prayed and, as crazy as it sounds, received some direction from our spirit guides, ancestors, and just brewed those first two batches, which were our Stokely Stout and our Asada Ale.
So are these 2 batches unique to the brewery industry or what? I mean, what did your spirits guide tell you?
Yeah, I mean, we were using a lot of anointed moon water, holy water at the
Mm.
time, a lot of herbs that you would see used in like black church rituals. Definitely, we're holding each brew day as a ritual brew day. So for us, that was different, where we started and ended with prayer, meditation, had our incense, various herbs, holy water, all of that. So it was a qualitatively different experience. And many of the early brew days were focused on women and Black queer women, which was certainly unique.
I see. So how many different, um, types of beer have you been doing? I mean, do you have just the ones you always do? Do you always add new ones? How does that work?
Yeah, so we've brewed over 60 different types of beer. I am the chief visionary, right? So I think about something and similar to John, it sounds like we'll figure out like what does a blood orange, pineapple, dat dare ginger beer taste like and go through recipe design and get it on our production schedule. So we definitely have a core of about 5 to 8 beers in our ginger beer, which folks love, our Dat Dare ginger beer, which we'll be releasing in cans within the next 2 to 3 months. So we like to experiment as well as have our core.
Mhm. So let me why a can? Why cans? Well, I mean, I heard John mentioned we're gonna be doing some cans. You just mentioned what is so important about cans?
Yeah, I would piggyback on what John said in terms of bottles just losing their market share in the industry across the board right now, and folks specifically who are looking for craft beer, who are new to craft beer, just having the thought of craft beer in cans. Craft beer in cans is more accessible to the consumer. You can take them on the beach, you can take them on your camping trip, and generally they tend to be, from my understanding, better for the environment because they're easy for folks to think about recycling. So for us, it's just really being in community and listening to what the community has asked for.
Ah, that's interesting. I never would have. I always prefer, when I'm given a choice, I will take a bottle.
I think a lot of people will, but if you, if you, a lot of people, sure, maybe they would take a bottle over a can, historically being the thought process, but a lot of people will probably take draft over the bottle. And the draft
Yeah.
is nothing but a gigantic steel can. I mean, it's in
Hmm.
a keg. And I think from the beer perspective, over the cider perspective, it offers additional product quality, um, you know, I guess issues. Basically, one of the primary drivers in degrading beer and kind of creating skunk beer is light penetration because it's going to break down the acid and the hops and actually give you a foul product. However, if you're in a can, you've got total opacity, so you're not getting any light penetration, and therefore you're not getting any of that breakdown of those acids. So for preservation of beer, being in a can is super important. For cider, we don't face the same issues because we don't use hops in every cider. In fact, you're only using hops in cider if it is a specifically hoppy cider. And even most of those, there are some groups that'll do a boil, so you will get a different acid release. But if you're just dry hopping, you're not going to get the same acids
Hmm.
released that are still breaking down due to light penetration and
Gotcha.
light pollution. So
Gotcha.
I think that's important. I think on the recycling side, a lot of recycling is not as valuable, I guess I should say, as can recycling. Metal recycling is extremely valuable in terms of reusing those products
Hmm.
more so than say paper or even a lot of plastics,
Gotcha.
just based on the emissions and things
Interesting.
to create new.
Well, you
Um,
both have brought up interesting, things that I would never, normally think about. So,
well, here's another
yeah.
thing to think about
Uh-huh.
between those two as well. Um, you can ship 60 cases of, we'll put 60 cases of cider on a pallet. You could put on that same pallet 100 cases of cans, and it'll only weigh 100 pounds more. So you're shipping, it's not just that good for the environment from the recycling perspective, but also your fuel's being used. It's that much of a difference in weight. When you also think about the additional paper products that go into labels, if you're doing bottles, you've got a cap, you've got labels, you've got a 6-pack carrier, and then the 6-pack carrier is in a piece of cardboard, a mother carton for the
Gotcha.
case. So there's a lot of additional packaging that
Yeah.
goes into it. That's one thing that we've looked at longer term
Mhm.
is really evaluating, how much do we spend on packaging and what would those savings look like if we transition into
So,
cans?
so let me ask. So, and that's important. So, LA, are you shipping out too, or are you just locally?
So where we're at right now is doing collaborations with folks in North Carolina, and distributing in drafts in cans
Mhm.
in North Carolina, as well as continuing to develop our blueprint and package and distribute in the DC, Maryland area.
Okay, gotcha. So you do want to have a location? Is that correct, or do you want to just be wholesale?
No, absolutely. Have multiple locations. So
Multiple
one of the things
locations.
that made us different in the brewing industry was having multiple small locations that were community centers across the United States, specifically in areas that are impacted the most by blight and gentrification. So thinking about having this, nano-sized brewery, brew pub, let's say in various neighborhoods in Baltimore City. So we would be like the Starbucks of beer, for example. So we would have our core beers that we're making in collaboration and through contract brewing, as well as, Maryland's stout or what have you, right? So you and your friends, your community folks, and coming in and building and really hosting and sharing space together could have an idea for a beer. Well, let's experiment with it on our pilot system and put it on draft, right? And so we're building not just beer, but really focusing intentionally on building communities. So for us, it's not just about sale, so to say. It's
Mhm.
about really having that space
Mhm.
for folks who often are intimidated by going into, your typical craft breweries.
And why are they intimidated?
I mean, there could be a lot of reasons. I know as a Black queer woman, it's often a lot to think about going into breweries that are not owned by friends and homies, right? Because we're looking at the types of culture that we expect to be in those areas. For example, when I go to the door, are there people that look like me? Was the beer brewed by people that look like me? Were the hops and other ingredients sourced from people that look like me? Will the music be reflective of my culture? What's on the TVs? Who's actually on the brew staff? Are the beers going to be super hop forward? Am I going to get 1,000 different New England IPAs?
Mhm.
Are the resources that are made in this community going back to communities
Mhm.
like me? And I
S
think,
Mhm.
given where we're at politically, as I'm always thinking and navigating spaces that are going to be the safest, it's not often in breweries where there is the least likelihood that folks look like me and share my same socio-political
And
experience.
why, tell me, why does being in an environment of the same I mean, I can understand the safe, but tell me why it matters in other ways. I mean, why is it important that somebody looks like you or that the person behind the counter is like you? Why does that matter? Tell me why.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it has to be like an entirely Black woman queer space. I think it's about safety in an era where we're living as a person with marginalized identities, living on the edge, right? Living and thinking about how to best navigate these spaces, particularly when people are drinking. And
Oh, I
it's
see.
important because of the types of conversations, because of even the types of engagements and interactions. So, for example, when we had our location in Hendersonville, people came in and asked for the cop killer stout, right? Like that's not that automatically creates hostility, right? Emotional and racial hostility, where we're really focused on liberation libations, resiliency drinks, and being that safe space for all people, regardless of their social,
Wow.
economic, political background. So I think that there are ways that as Americans, we're socialized with this cognitive dissonance
Mhm.
and are so self centered in our own identities that we're
Mhm.
not even aware of the ways that often us showing up impact folks who perhaps are not native born, right? Folks who perhaps are not English speaking as a first language. And so this truly impacts our taproom cultures and the sense of community. I was in a brewery, a friend's brewery here in Baltimore, and literally 100% of the people were white, 90 plus percent of the people were men with beards. And like there was no even awareness of how that felt for my colleague and I to be the only people who were other in that space, right? And it wasn't that anyone was saying anything to us or doing anything to us, but that was the point, right?
Mhm.
Like other folks that looked the same could walk in and, hey, how are you? How are you doing? Sure, we'll make some space here. But for whatever reason, for us, that's not the case. So really thinking about the ways that the microaggressions and various forms of intersectionality juxtaposed with interlocking supremacy systems create barriers for folks accessing spaces that are community
This
spaces.
is just so it's so interesting because I'm listening to John and I mean, they're all community minded and they're doing all these things and they care. I mean, I love having, individuals like yourselves on the show in business who show, how business should be and things that I don't think about. And now you're bringing up this issue where I want everybody just to be together, right? I don't want
Hmm.
the separation and I want everybody to feel comfortable being together and welcoming each other and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I can see exactly what you're saying and how relevant it is, to feel comfortable in a space where there's drinking and anything can happen. And like if I walked into a room of all men and I was the only woman, I'd be uncomfortable no matter what. Even though I'm brave and I don't want to be uncomfortable, I very well could be. John, what do you think about what she's saying?
Yeah, no, I think it's extremely important, and I think it's it highlights something that hopefully the industry as a whole, not just cider, but beer, wine, everyone is working toward in terms of who are the people who are working in the industry, who are making these beverages, who are working in packaging and shipping and everything else, and are we reflecting our overall demographics of our environment and including everyone? And I completely agree with LA. I mean, if
Mhm.
you look historically, it seems like a lot of breweries grew out of a bunch of white guys with beards in the backyard making beer, and then they decided to start a business. Um, and I think that's probably lent itself to kind of the current situation and kind of the demographic that exists. But I think, if you look on our side, I mean, we have females that work in production, we have men that work in retail and ladies that work in retail as well. I mean, we try to be a very inclusive environment.
Right.
And I hope that we'll continue to do a
And I
great
guess
job
it
at that.
depends. I guess it depends on, where even and like does it I'm giving an answer, but I think I need you to tell me. Does it depend on, where it is? Because if you go into Bull City, I mean, you're gonna
Mhm.
find you would walk in, I would think, and be very comfortable. But maybe in some other smaller areas, maybe not so much. And maybe we're talking, maybe the focus of what I'm saying is wrong. Maybe I'm missing the point.
And that could quite well be the case. I mean, I think you're right with regards to Bull City when you come there, and I don't know if it's because the beverage, like we were talking about earlier, is kind of hybridized. So it's not, if you say historically and kind of generalizing here, but you do have more of the white guys with the beards that really love IPAs, and that's kind of that demographic. Cider is really an open beverage, and
Yes.
it does pull from both the female and the male population. And I
Mhm.
guess kind of counter to exactly what you're saying, where it's beer has kind of historically been that. Cider was probably more historically assumed to be like, oh, women are more into cider than
Right.
beer.
Right.
And reality is we see both hanging out
Right.
at the
You
cidery all
you're
the
right.
time. And,
Right. You
there's a lot
do.
of ethnic diversity that
Right.
comes to the cidery as well. So it's something that from a business perspective and how we've created our environment, I'm very proud
Yeah,
of
so
how
you
we've
want
marketed and been
that.
able to
Right.
bring everybody in.
You want
Yeah.
that message. LA.
Mhm.
Yes.
What are you saying?
Yeah, I think I would agree with John that a lot of times when we're looking at the beer industry, the actual beers, the liquid that's in the tanks is catered to a specific demographic, which is, the white folks, the white men with beards. I think that regardless of whether a brewery is in downtown Hendersonville or downtown Washington, D.C., it's about the intentionality behind crafting the tap room culture, as well as the production team, and really being in the highest alignment of integrity with, hey, we want to have folks who are reflective of the culture that we seek to perpetuate in the world. Right. So it's not about like when we had our Hendersonville location, it certainly was not like all people of color all the time. Right. But what it was about was people who shared the same values about social justice, about
Right.
ethics, and about liberation, gathering through all of the stages of life and breaking bread together and sharing beer.
So was that the most important thing? Was it the intention and the integrity over the, the over the gender or over any of those other issues? Was it mostly about who showed up to drink?
It was
Where they
about
could
creating really great craft beer
okay.
that folks that didn't particularly like craft beer would love to enjoy and have a
Okay.
safe space to enjoy that with their friends, family, and community. But at the core of what we were doing was really refining our recipes and looking at making great craft beer.
So are there other uh, companies like yourself that you've been come aware of, or are you that unique?
No, I think there are definitely breweries, cideries, wine companies, distilleries who also have really great social justice missions
Mhm.
at being the best in their craft. as well as holding space with and in community in a particular type of way. Definitely, as we've learned and grown in the industry, we found there being handfuls of other Black breweries, people of color owned breweries that inherently have messages of liberation and connective economics at their core, while also turning out some really amazing, great craft beers.
And so, John was saying, so some of his, some of the challenge that he might see is in educating the public about cider. Is that right, John?
That's correct.
What about you, LA? What is your, if you had a stumbling block or a big mission, or what is your, let's say, your marketing message? What is that?
Yeah, I would say that for us, it's educating folks about sweet beer and being the founders of like the sweet beer movement. So folks thinking that we're just adding a whole bunch of sugar at kegging, and really doing the decoded language of sweet beer, meaning bigger beers, more maltier beers, looking at additional things that we can use to sweeten beers, whether agave nectar, if we're making pulque and things of that nature, and really telling the story of each of the beers. One of the things that makes us certainly unique and distinctive is our on the grounds approach in community. So for example, Ralik and I, who's our VP of marketing and community outreach, we're literally in Baltimore City and DC with samples of the beer, going to talk to folks on the corners, at restaurants, in the athletic clubs, wherever we are and wherever we're naturally building community, letting them sample the beer, telling them about our social mission and how we're connected with the movement, activist work at the intersections of liberation and resiliency, and having the Black Star Line experience. It's more than just beer, even though we are making really great quality craft beer. It really is a movement that's focused on bringing more folks to the party, whether you're a beer drinker right now or not. We feel very strongly that we have something for everyone and there's a place for everyone at the table.
Well, this is really fascinating. And I know that unfortunately we're almost at the end of our time for our show. But I'm going to see if maybe, each of you will come back so we
Yeah,
can
absolutely.
explore this a little bit more, because there's so much more to share and talk about. So, and I know that LA, you've been through a lot too, and we certainly want to talk about all of these things, and too much to talk about, at this point. So, if I want your beer, LA, where do I have to go to get it?
If you want Black Star Line beer right now, give us a couple weeks and we will be in the Charlotte, Durham, and Asheville area. And then within the next 2 to 3 months, we'll be available in cans.
And so maybe you and John will have some opportunities to come together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
At some point.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah. And
certainly when you're in Durham, please look us up and we'll exchange all the information. So we'd love to have you by the cidery, and I'd love to try some of the beer. As I said, I still drink a lot of beer, not just cider.
And for all of you in the world, wherever you're calling, wherever you're listening from, and to the show, because we have people from all over the world. This is an interesting movement. This is an interesting way of looking at a particular market, a particular item, a way of doing things, a way of community. I mean, with whatever climate you're in, whether it's a political climate, the business climate, whatever climate we're in, it is up to us to make the differences. We cannot wait for anybody else. And so these guests today, they're doing their thing, their way, and they're making a difference. And that's how business is supposed to be. And we're being forced to do things right, is how I think. I think we're being forced to do things in the right way. And you both are showing that. So, John, where would, if our listeners want beer and they're local, where do they go? And if they're not local, what do they do?
So if they'd like to get any of our ciders, you can find them at a fair number of the Harris Teeters, Food Lions, all the Whole Foods, some of the fresh markets, any of your independent bottle shops in North Carolina, South Carolina. We'll be going into a bunch of the Krogers in Atlanta over the next 2 to 3 months as they complete their resets. So kind of a variety of locations for your off-premise, and then your on-premise. Certainly restaurants, bars, places like that around the area. I mean, we probably have 1,500 accounts between the 3 states that we operate in, or so. So if there's a specific place or somebody's trying to get it for a specific purpose, you can always reach directly out to me. John.Clowney at Bull City Cider Works, and I'll certainly point them in the right direction.
Perfect. And what about you, LA? You want to be huge, right?
We want to have great beer in areas where there's definitely folks who are historically marginalized and disenfranchised, as well as crossing over to populations of folks who want to try the sweet beer movement. We definitely have traditional beers for our beards out there too. So folks can reach us certainly via text 202-425-4910 or via email at hi@blackstarlinebrewing.com.
Are you going to franchise, LA?
I don't know that we would call it franchise, but we will definitely have multiple locations across the United States.
Okay. And so maybe both of you will join our Facebook page at Breaking Free and keep us up to date on what's happening in your businesses so that we can keep our audience abreast of this. And then I would love to invite you back and, go into some of this a little bit more because there's so much to talk about. And, I'd love to have you both come on, and maybe next time we'll bring you on separately so we can get more involved in you personally and your business. So
I'd love to come back anytime, and
Good.
hopefully I'm physically there so I can bring you some samples too.
Yes,
That's the fun part.
we'll have to make that happen. And and LA, maybe you can do the same thing.
Yes, we'd love that.
You come in personally, and I'm sure you'll be back down here, and would love to sample some of those beers. I'm gluten-free, so that's a problem for me. But nonetheless, we'd love to have you both come in. And so, Amnon, you have so just so you all know, I got this great book that I want you all to go get. It's on Amazon. It's called the In Just One Afternoon, Listening into the Hearts of Men. And soon out will be In Just One Afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Twins. And I've interviewed, oh my God, 50 some odd sets of twins and just amazing relationships. I mean, it's all about relationships and how we build them and how we love each other. And I think, listening into the core of someone is so important. And you got a chance to do that today. You got a chance to listen into the core of John and his business, and you got a chance to listen into the core of LA and do you call yourself her or they? I want to be clear.
I prefer they, them, there.
Okay, gotcha. Into they business, right? Is that good?
Into their business.
Into their business. That's perfect. I want to make sure that's all cool. What do you have there? Oh, and then also, I use eye contact. I want to just share it because I like sharing the wealth. Amnon just reminded me, if you go there and you're interested in learning more and getting discounts and getting some great email marketing, you can use the code Breaking Free and you will get it. And that's all I have to say. So to the two of you, I want to thank you and honor you for being here today. Thank you so much. And I look forward to having you again. John, I hope your dog is safe. And
yep, he's doing all right. He's asleep right now.
Good. And LA, we're going to be in touch with you again too. All right.
All right. Thanks so much.
Oh, bless
all right,
you
thank
too.
You so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.